So I'll be arguing against the proposition, which is in most cases animal testing is unnecessary. The two secondary claims are: one, there are many alternatives to animal testing that can be used in place of cruel testing on animals, rendering animal testing unnecessary. And two, testing fails when done on animals. These are specific cases that prove animal testing to be unreliable. So my argument for the first secondary claim is challenging your reasons. So first, animal testing is necessary and has worked over the years and has found cures. Second, you don't give examples or statistics on how human testing has worked. And third, your piece of evidence on in vitro has actually caused problems for humans. So for your first secondary claim, you say animal testing is unnecessary and does not work when really it actually works. We know this because of studies that scientists have done on animals. According to an organization called Understanding Animals Research, Research has helped develop modern vaccines vaccines including those against polio, TB, meningitis, and recently the human papillomavirus, HPV, which has been linked to cervical cancer. This virus, called human papillomavirus, is an infection on the skin that can cause warts. This is very common. And also another study done was the development of tamoxifen in animals led a 30% fall in death rates from breast cancer in the 1990s. The drug called tamoxifen is used to treat breast cancer. So what the scientists do is put the drug in the animal's system to see how they react to the drug, and over the years this has worked. Another problem you have is that you don't give examples on how human testing has worked or give statistics, which is important for your argument. Lastly, your evidence on in vitro has actually brought up problems for humans. In vitro takes place in a test tube, culture dish, or elsewhere outside a living organism. The problem with in vitro is it only grows in one cell in the body. According to an organization called Create Health, the disadvantages are it takes a long time and may need to do more than one cycle of the procedure. Another disadvantage is it can have some side effects like ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. Ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome affects the ovaries of women. These disadvantages for in vitro has an impact on humans and can actually bring up problems, which makes it harder to find a cure. Next, I will be challenging your evidence for your secondary claim. First, you say animal testing fails when actually it works. Second, your evidence on thalidomide and Vioxx disaster is old and not acceptable for your argument. For your second secondary claim, you explain that animal testing has failed to find cures when it really hasn't. Scientist named Colin Blakemore explained just last week, researchers in Seattle announced they had used an electronic brain implant to enable a monkey to move its paralyzed limbs. Is a discovery which the potential to allow severely disabled people to regain movement. So this study on electronic brain implants on monkeys has allowed paralyzed monkeys to move again. Also, the study made it possible for disabled people to move also. Colin Blakemore has stated, biologically we are similar to species such as mice and rats because we are practically the same. They have the same set of genes. Their bodies respond to disease and treatments such as our own. Animal testing makes sense because their genes are the same as humans, which means diseases and treatments for animals are the same. This is why animal testing is used to find cures. Lastly, your two pieces of evidence is old and is not acceptable for your argument. Your first piece of evidence on thalidomide is a drug that was found in the 1950s, which is over 50 years old. And second piece of evidence on Vioxx was found in the 2000s, which makes it almost 20 years old. These two pieces of evidence do not help your argument because they're not recent. So my argument is animal testing is necessary and is because it is a reasonable way to find cures for humans, and that it works and it has worked in the past. Thank you.
All right, the introductory stuff is fine. When you get to the main point, you do make a counterclaim on the first point, suggesting that this research does in fact have an impact. You give examples, so those are pretty good. I do think you need to contrast that a little bit to the evidence that the advocate is talking about on this particular situation. What reasons do they have for believing that it doesn't have any significant advantage? What are their justifications there? Do they challenge the legitimacy of the comparisons between animals? Are they using examples of failed experimentations to try to prove their point? You do respond to failed experimentations on the last point, but I don't know exactly what their information was on this particular point. It's all counterclaim on this argument, and they're good counterclaims, I think. I do think, however, that there are a couple of spots where you need to remind us in this, for example, the tamoxifen in evidence that you talk about on breast cancer. There should be some reference to the fact that these are based, that we discovered this as a result of animal research. And I assume that that's in there someplace, but it was not very clearly cited, and it should be, if you've got a direct quote, that's the way to make that argument and cite it in that argument. The in vitro argument, you basically have counter arguments on this suggesting that there are problems with this. It was a little confusing to me. I'm not exactly sure how the side effects on ovaries are going to happen if we're just operating inside of a culture, a petri dish. If it's all being done inside a human being, for instance, then it's not an animal research anymore. It's a human research, and there are other restrictions that we might be dealing with. So I think there's some confusion on how this argument is being applied on this particular point. Your criticism of thalidomide and Vioxx as examples you mentioned it at the beginning of the second point, and then you talk about it at the end. In between, you've got the best part of your argument, which suggests that we do have advantages from doing animal research, and that there are similarities between animals and human beings that give us these benefits. I think those ought to be the claims that you start off with, and then go back down to the thalidomide and Vioxx arguments. Your criticism of those examples is that they're old, which I think is a good first starting point, but the fact that they're old doesn't mean that they aren't relevant. If in fact the testing that was done on Vioxx suggested it was safe in animals, and then it created a problem for humans, that undermines the legitimacy of animal testing, or at least it did. If animal testing has changed dramatically in the last 20 years, you need to explain how it's changed so that these Vioxx issues wouldn't happen again. The thalidomide issue, for example, occurred largely before human trials were also required for safety issues, and I think that there's a good argument to be made on that particular point, that the age of this ignores subsequent legislation that's tried to address those issues, and so the same results would be unlikely. But that's a context argument where you have to get a little bit more into the context. The presentation, I think, maybe it's a little dry. You need to speak up a bit more. That's fine. Okay, thank you.